Yeah, Wade Laughter here, and in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about soil, and I'm a cannabis farmer who is thrilled to be able to work in the native soil that we have here in the county. I have the red clay that's fairly common. It's the property that I'm on was a farm long ago. It turned into a vacation home for a bunch of years, and now it's a farm again. And I'm a big fan of sourcing all of your inputs on your farm, because that way you know what's in them. And what's true is, especially if you have very much land and pay attention to what you have, there's a number of opportunities with the things that grow in our area to supplement the soil that you have on your land and create productive soil without taking a chance of bringing something in from another place that might compromise the integrity of your end product, the medicine that we're here to talk about, cannabis. That's my story. And yeah, part of what we'll talk about today is some of the things that I've done to do that. And as Frida said, what I love about this group is that Krsna has a way that's similar to my own, but really radically different in other ways. And Brian does as well, and yet we each come to it because we love the place that we live, we love the land that we are fortunate enough to be able to own, and we want to care for it as responsible stewards, not just of our spot, but the surrounding properties and the whole watershed. Because the fact is, all the water that we have is what we have. More is not coming, we're not making more. And if you want to drink the water, or the fish need the water to swim in, and the frogs need it for reproduction, and there's just so many levels of life where water is an essential component. And we're trashing the water that's on our planet. And as cannabis farmers, I think one of the ways that we can help change our world, if you will, is through being responsible stewards of what we're doing, being aware of where we are and the impacts that it can have, and how to reduce those impacts, and in fact, actually enhance the quality of the watershed instead of taking from it. Who's next?
Sure.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Chaplin. Nice to be up here with you guys. Thanks Circle and Frida and everyone in the Circle organization, my fellow Alliance members over there. Yeah, I've done some panels like this, throughout the state, and full disclosure, I'm not a botanist or a horticulturist or a scientist or a soil biologist. I've just learned a lot the last decade of cultivating. Like many people I know, I started off as an indoor grower, and that was just what you learned from just your homies. And as I got into understanding the plant, understanding the different methods, and like Wade said, the end product, it became more imperative to me to figure out different mechanics on soil and production systems, and then also to be able to obtain a quality end product that's going to go to the end user. In early 2016, I started to conceptualize a brand, and I wasn't feeling satiated with what I was doing. I was growing cannabis, I was growing a lot of it, and it was getting pretty mundane for me. And I started to put myself out there in the public and the community and meet more people, and asking questions and calling up horticulturists and really just diving in on how to really grow better for the product that I was growing, and be a good steward of the land. And with that said, I've learned a lot through two mentors of mine. One's a horticulturist and one's a medicine maker, and he's 72 years old, and he taught me about the rhizosphere. Does anyone know what the rhizosphere is? Who knows?
Oh, they are, sorry.
I like to interact, so who knows what the rhizosphere is?
Rhizosphere is the interaction of the Earth's surface to the soil, it's not first 4 to 5 inches there.
Exactly.
Root
So
zone.
it's basically your topsoil. So if you're focusing on the very first 4 inches of your soil, you're obtaining the most effective way of getting the nutrients to the roots of the plant. So we're feeding soil, not the
What did you call it?
rhizosphere. rhizosphere. We can go.
Cannabis is
explore
a
that. Yeah.
shallow root plant, right?
Exactly. So I know we'll probably all get into the endocannabinoid system here.
At some point, probably.
The rhizosphere, think of all the roots are out. It really mimics the endocannabinoid system in our head. So
The fungi, where the fungi, but the plants need to take the nutrients.
yeah, it's the most
The fungi is for growing the fungi and it's all the nutrients.
exactly.
Yeah,
So the very immediate zone where the roots of the plant hit the soil. So if you're really focusing on that. So my group and I, what we focus on is the rhizosphere and a living soil infusion mat, and it's 4 inches of soil. We grow all our cannabis in mixed light greenhouses, influenced from permaculture design, with zero discharge. So if this is the footprint of our greenhouse, we have upcycled plastic down, and then we throw our soil down on it and plug plants in, and the whole footprint of the greenhouse is one large living soil infusion mat, which is the rhizosphere. So what is below is as above. So we want to create lateral root growth and canopy, and then with a healthy canopy and a healthy plant, healthy soil equals healthy plants equal healthy people, and then that produces a quality medicinal product for the end user. So that's some of the work that we're doing, and I know it all kind of mixes in here, so it's fun.
I'm Krsna Bryant, and ever since I met cannabis, I fell in love with it at a very young age, 15, and at that point I really wanted to grow cannabis. I wanted to see it become legal. I thought I might live a life where it never became legal, so it's great to be here at a place where we're on the cusp of legalization, or we're already there, I guess, maybe.
Such as it is, here it comes.
And I grew up in a Christian community back on the East Coast, and there was cannabis culture on the fringes of the community, and that was partially how I got introduced to it. And I moved to the Bay Area and spent 10 years in the Bay Area. Built up a web development business. I did graphic design and information technology, and so my whole background is really computers and tech for my whole life. And when I was young, I did grow experimentally, guerrilla in the woods a little bit behind my parents' place. And, built up a web development company in the Bay Area. Built a lot of good websites for a lot of music industry, nonprofit. We started looking to get a place, and we had friends up in this area and came up to visit. Took one dip in the Yuba River, and that was all it took. Instant love. Just this is the place, So I've been here 8 years, and I've grown indoors and don't do that anymore. I much prefer to grow under the sun. And, I love to experiment and learn, so I'm always trying to try new things. Really try to pay attention to what's going on at all the different levels. There's a lot going on that we can't see with our eyes, and so how do you really know what's happening there? Trying to really learn and understand all the especially about the microbiome and the interaction between the fungus and the bacteria, and and all the microorganisms that complete the soil. Our property is about 3 acres, and it's a 3,600 feet elevation, which is, maybe slightly unique for the county. And so we have a different set of things that we have to deal with, cold weather, and, which can be have its drawbacks, but also can be positive as well. So, I'm here because of Circle as well. I really love what Circle does, and it's really critical that we take care of our watershed here. And so when I'm working on a day-to-day basis, I'm trying to think, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that we're taking care of the environment here, that we're building it, improving it, not just trying to make a bunch of money. So. Also, I'm here because I use cannabis for my own personal health, and I want it to be see it be used for the health of everyone. And also, I come from an open source background, so to speak, with technology. My web development company was an open source company where we shared the code that we wrote and shared the techniques, and played a part in an open source community where we contributed back to the software that we built. And I'd like to see that type of concept in the cannabis industry as well, where we all share information as much as possible and help each other out. I can get into, I guess the other unique thing is composting. I do pretty extreme composting, and so I'd be happy to talk about that in detail with everyone, and have that open discussion.
So one of the things I want to offer up is that, may I talk about it?
Please do.
I've been to both of these gentlemen's farms, and they've been to mine. And what I want to point out is the commonalities, where we're all trying to develop or enhance the biology in our soils, the fungus and the bacteria. And in the composting thing, you want animal manures. He has access to a plentiful supply of various animal manures. And by mixing them into vegetable material, he's making really rich soil pretty quickly in the presence of earthworms. And I don't know, you do compost teas too in your soil?
We have in the past, but not currently. Effectively, when we water, we're making compost tea every time we water, and it's doing it on the top layer of the soil.
In the meantime, Brian here, like you said, 4 inches, sitting on top of an impermeable membrane, so nothing that's extra, if you will, if anything extra ends up in the soil there, can wash down into the soil below his greenhouse. It's all fully contained, which is a really beautiful idea. In the meantime, I have, over the years, built up almost like a lasagna bed. I don't have access to large amounts of animal manures. I have abundant wood chips, and just started getting access to some horse manure. But I've been a big group fan of cover crops, adding things like nitrogen fixers or soil builder mix, available at Peaceful Valley, to name one spot. But plants can grow the same things that animals provide as manure, and all of the manures that you use are from plant-eating animals, right? No carnivores, right? That's an important consideration. Like dog and cat manures.
Yes, I don't believe any. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just saying. But, and human manure, just to get really graphic for a second, but human manures have to be handled really carefully if you were to use them, and of course in the United States it's profoundly against the law to do so.
You could bird guano.
Guanos.
An exception in that.
Build bat houses at your property, and the bats, the guano will fall out of the bat houses, and you can collect it and use it in your gardens. That's a way of sourcing guano right at your place. guys both have such amazing
You both
things
made
to
me
offer.
think of, principles of permaculture. Does anyone know what some of the basic principles of permaculture are? People, permanent culture, everything is in relationship with its surroundings.
Sustainability.
Sustainability, we're greater than the sum of our parts. It's all very practical wisdom. I mean, the word permaculture might throw people off and think you need to be this, very educated, scientist or biologist, but like what Wade and Krsna was saying is they're using everything that they can find on their property to build their soil. And for me, I mean, I like to treat my single production system, which would be one greenhouse, and really keep track of the inputs and the outputs. So inputs meaning fertilizer, water, with the zero discharge that Wade was talking about at my farm, we're able to really target the amount of water that we use for every feed. I mean, I could go in a spreadsheet and find the exact amount of water I use through a whole cycle. And that's super important. We're not dumping, to just hit this greenhouse with 1,000 gallons of water and, 750 of it is leaching through to the earth, which eventually makes it to the river. So for me, I like to look at these principles of permaculture as, and strategize more on like a business. Our soil isn't depreciating in value; it's actually appreciating. So the more you keep adding to it, the more value you're getting out of it, and then you can really start to slough off some of the nutrients that you're using, and get that nice balance of soil, sun, and water. And that's what the real value is by doing the practices that we deploy at our farms. Even though they're completely different, we're all trying to achieve the same end result, and that's the fun part of it. You also mentioned something about you don't use compost teas. You actually make the tea on, like, every time you water.
Well, because of our top dressing.
We do the same thing. So there's a lot of folks out there that, buying these big bio brewers for teas, and it's just you're just throwing your money away. You can actually make your tea on your soil, and that's just being, paying attention. It's being mindful around your garden and understanding what the soil is.
I would say with the teas, it's, and we can get into in detail, but when you're trying to grow bacteria and fungus straight in water, it's pretty difficult because that's not the environment that they grow in. They grow in a fibrous, aerated environment. And you can aerate your water in your tea, but you're still not going to be able to get the level of air that you really need to have like rapid growth of fungus and bacteria. And also it's very delicate, right? You can, just the wrong conditions, the sunlight, the UV rays coming in, or the temperature, et cetera, can have a huge impact on what your microbial counts are in your tea, and it might not even be, you might, without looking at it in a microscope and seeing, okay, yeah, am I actually growing these things, and that's when they're going to help the plant, then maybe you're wasting your time.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Well, let's interact.
Yeah, I have a question.
Because that's permaculture, interacting.
In terms of getting our product tested in the future, some people have been popping for E. coli. Is that, that if I didn't know a lot about compost, I would think like animal manure, this is not a good thing because it could breed E. coli. Is that just maybe them not composting properly, like not allowing enough time for everything to break down, or just thoughts on E. coli and compost?
I just received some test results back from some whole plant extract that was made from some Afghan goo.
What kind of goo?
Afghan goo. It's a very Nevada County strain. It grows really well here, and That's the strain that we prefer to use for our whole plant extract for the tinctures we make. And we pass the E. coli test just to, but they are testing for that. I think kind of what Kristen was saying is like just the, if you're making teas and brewers, just the right tweak or wrong tweak in the environment can turn that all anaerobic, and then you dump it in your soil and your plants uptake that.
Right, like I don't know what their practices were exactly.
Yeah, so I mean.
But a lot of people are organic, natural, this and that.
Or
But like,
I'd say.
until we break it down into like what exactly we're doing, what is the best management practice.
For me with compost teas, I don't like the brew tea. It's almost, you're adding an extra step and you're also on the verge of danger. I'll brew it for 24 hours, but the power goes out, or you're using power in a generator and the gas runs out in the generator. You tell your girlfriend or boyfriend to go, put the bubbler in. I mean, it's like you don't need to do that when you can make it right on the topsoil. And with that said, I think cannabis over the last, since I've been doing it 10 years, but people I've talked to since Prop 215 in '96, it's just become, everyone's overcomplicated it. I mean, you go down to all the grocery stores and it's like, what do I do when, they're your friends behind the counter, but they're selling you the $80 gallon of like bud bloom juice to go dump in your soil, and that's what it's turned into. So it's like, let's take a step backwards and simplify things.
I would say on the E. coli, I don't know anything about like E. coli and how cannabis would get contaminated with E. coli, apart from basically someone who, say there's not an outhouse and they go take a crap in the woods,
Right.
and then they come back and their hands are dirty and then they handle the plant.
Or on the drying and curing process.
Yeah, exactly. The handling or even the trimming process, if it's, if someone's just not being clean. So I don't think
Right.
the risk there from the manure, but I think your risk is pretty minimal.
I want to add I'm super cautious with cannabis because for years all of the plant material that I generate goes to be made into oils that goes to people that often need large quantities of it, and I don't want to contaminate it with anything. So one of the practices I've developed for myself is it's very rare for me to spray anything on the plant surfaces. And one of my fears with compost tea used as a foliar spray is if the tea's not prepared properly, you could actually be introducing E. coli bacteria onto leaf surfaces, and maybe there's something about the humidity and the temperature and the lack of sunlight and whatnot that those bacteria are actually able to survive and maybe even thrive. I think it's more likely what Krsna was suggesting, that it's really an issue of everyone that handles cannabis every step of the way. We have to treat it like it's medicine. And the new state regulations are going to require testing for all these things. And if you're not treating it as medicine, it may pop up for something like that. One more rant, if you will. The economic aspects of what we're talking about, I think, will become huge in the cannabis work, because our costs as cannabis workers, producers, are going up pretty dramatically if you're going to stay in the regulated marketplace. You're going to have to start paying bookkeepers and attorneys and on and on and on and on, and corporation fees and taxes and all things that you may not have had to do before now. And you might have noticed that the retail, if you will, price of wholesale cannabis has changed pretty dramatically in the last few years. And I think in the long run, if you're able to secure licensing and permitting in your local jurisdiction, and you can grow cannabis that is free of contaminants and properly trimmed, and what the market is seeking, that price will go up again pretty substantially. But there was a lot of ifs before that price went up substantially. And so political activism is an important part of this conversation, not just for the river, but for your opportunity to practice the work you've been doing. You got to get involved. And part of why I think all three of us are up here is we are involved in trying to help all of us increase the quality of what we're doing. We have the perfect environment for this if we are responsible stewards of that environment, so that the other folks that are in this community with us will let us do this work that we'd like to keep doing. In the meantime, like I said, the marketplace, I think Nevada County already has a pretty stellar reputation, if you will, in this work. But this point of view about how to, part of what goes on here is that all three of us on our own really stopped and looked at the cannabis plant. What does it really need to flourish? And how can I provide that? And one of the big factors going to be coming into play for all of you that want to try and do this is the economic cost of your practices. The days of being able to walk into a store with a big roll of money and buy what you need to make your recipe work are really over. Sorry, it's done. You have to learn how to make the highest quality possible product at the lowest possible cost to you.
And being
All
socially
three,
responsible.
while being socially responsible, and what we're really talking about is a lot more work. Okay, you don't go to the store and buy, if you're not buying jugs of things, you have to figure out a way to make those things available to your plants in the medium you're growing them in. See, this is a fascinating thing. He's basically got one huge pot with a whole bunch of grass growing in it. It's this really beautiful thing, and it's like he's able to keep track of every single plant and how it's doing and what it's needing, and it's a pretty far out thing going that direction. Meantime, this guy here has these, I don't know how to describe them, they're like 4 or 5 feet tall, 6 or 8 feet diameter, huge lasagna beds where each one has a plant in it. And there's some of, and I've been working with cannabis for about 20 years, and indoors and seen a lot of outdoors and mixed light and blah, blah, blah. Some of the largest, happiest looking plants I've ever seen. Right here. In the meantime, he's not going to the store and buying things. He's talking to his neighbor. He's taking advantage of what would be waste streams, literally, and putting them to proper use and benefiting the environment, benefiting his work, and producing high-quality things. Bryant's doing the same thing. I'm doing a version of that. I'm not as far along as Krsna is, and really, both of these gentlemen are much more focused on the opportunity to produce this medicine in quantity. I'm really more focused on researching new types of things that we all might be interested in growing. So I don't overfeed my garden, if you will. I really am trying to source all of the inputs into my garden from my garden. I bought at the store this year a gallon of fish emulsion, and we still have some of it left. We use that early in the spring to help the new plants get started in the garden. But after that, they get water. And we have a little rainforest sprinkler that we run up until August, where they get a bath once in a while from the sky, like rain. And really, the permaculture thing is about working with nature, trying to take advantage of what she's offering to us to do what's really a pretty simple thing: help a weed be happy and grow. And I don't want to be critical of stores, the hydroponic stores that provide all of these materials. There's an economic cost associated with going into one of those stores, but there's also an undeniable environmental impact with most of the products that are sitting on those shelves. And I don't know if it's appropriate for a product placement thing here, but we actually have a garden supply store in this county that puts serious effort into sourcing all of their materials responsibly, like they go and check out where the bat guano comes from. And actually make sure that the people who are actually going into these caves where bats live aren't using backhoes to do that. You can see the problems there.
Treated accordingly.
I think we as business owners, each of you in some way has had a business of some sort associated with this plant. I think it's time for us to become responsible about how we're treating the planet. This plant is a healing plant. and it can be healing not just for the end user, but it's really been my experience that it can be very healing for those of you who work with it.
There's a question here.
Well,
Sorry.
it sounds to me like you guys are addressing mostly commercial activity here. And, some of us, like myself, I'm not interested in becoming a grower so I can sell it and make profit. I'm just interested and curious as to how I might grow for my own personal use, for medicinal use. And what I hear you referring to is, a natural way of utilizing what's available around us, instead of going out and buying a bunch of products, and making somebody else wealthy from, that they're opportunists out there. But what I'd like to hear is more specifics, like, okay, you talk about, what is it that you do? You make your compost and you make your tea is going to happen. You're going to steep it as you water it. It's going to be sprinkled on the ground. But what is it exactly? What's the recipe? What are you doing?
Sure.
And also, like, I don't remember each of your names, but
KD, Wade, and Brian.
okay. Well, name tags would have, because my memory is really poor. But, like, you create this sort of swimming pool. You've got the swimming pool system where it's a very shallow pool that you created, but what specifically are you using to contain it? What is that, where are you getting it? Where's the source?
That's actually, it's upcycled light depth plastic from old greenhouses. So again, I just used it right from my property. So 12 mil plastic.
And you don't have a problem with roots growing, popping right through it?
So the roots, when they hit, have you ever seen a pot or a bucket, when the roots hit the side, they wrap around?
They will, yeah.
So it's root bound, so when the roots go down and hit the plastic, they go out. So
Because I've also seen roots go right through asphalt. Or plants pop right through asphalt.
Yeah,
So
that's very
for me,
possible.
I just wonder, I've seen roots, they're gonna look for
they will
avenues.
find their way through.
Yeah,
And we do a no-till method, so when we cut the harvest, we cut if this is the plant here, we cut the root, kick it over 45 angle and cut the root out and leave all the remaining root system in that soil.
so that it can,
So it just regenerates itself.
It's going to be food for the worms. The worms are going to eat that and turn it back into.
And it's really
castings
healthy
for
when
you.
you see grasshoppers and spiders and frogs and birds, flying in there, and grass and clover and, a number of other things.
And you don't have like a research or something like the plants can be symbiosis with of here in this region, in this area. There's only native plants, that plants can be mixed with the land that you have been with.
So you're asking about research on?
No, like a symbiosis in plant, a research of plant, you need nitrogen, you can put some paint.
I think that's all about experimenting, being experimental and,
Like in permaculture, there is a lot of research. If you have this kind of plant, where you have to make it with this.
indicator plants, or are you talking about indicator plants, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you can have, like here, like you say, in your garden, you have like different kind of grasses growing with your wheat, no?
Yeah, we have clover,
There's
regular
actually-
clover,
There has to be some bushes or some different kind of grasses that are native that give you the nutrients you need for your plant, for your wheat.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Sorry, my English is not
It's
good.
all right. Thanks
Yeah.
for the question.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, all three of us have other plants growing around our cannabis plants. It's not a monoculture situation. Part of permaculture, biodynamics, regenerative agriculture is to allow diversity of life in your garden, not just plant life, but bug life as well. And I think all three of us, I don't know that Krishna plants things specifically in his pots to see that happen. But I use clover and vetch and peas. I like to eat peas, and meantime, all of those are nitrogen fixers. The red clay soil that we have here is deficient in nitrogen. The soil tests on my specific property say it has gross abundance of potassium and phosphorus, the P and K, part of the NPK formula, but I'm deficient in nitrogen. So I've really been focused on enhancing the amount of nitrogen that's available in the soil. And with cover cropping, you can cut it down and leave it lay right where it is, and or add a layer of mulch on top of it. And what happens is, over time, the various inhabitants, if you will, the microbiology and macrobiology that's in your soil, works its way up into those layers of material that you've put down over the years, and you start building this incredible rhizosphere. It includes mushrooms, it includes worms, it includes all kinds of critters you can and cannot see. But a real important thing for a homeowner, especially a small scale, but it's also important for large scale growers, is water. And here we come back to circle. If you buy water that comes to you through a meter, it's treated with chlorine or chloramine, which is put in that water because those materials are really effective at killing microorganisms.
On top of that, every once in a while, they do the altricide as well, right?
Well,
Locally here with
yeah,
NID.
we're working on changing that at NID. But yes, you have to be aware of the water. And like I said, if you're buying NID water through a meter, it's treated with chlorine. If you use it on your garden, you will kill the fungus especially, because they're very sensitive to chlorine and chloramine. But a lot of the microbiology in your soil gets killed off by treated waters. And there are ways you can dechlorinate your water if it's just chlorine. I don't know how Grass Valley treats their water. We're fortunate enough to have NID creek water, or ditch water, and we're on the Cascade Canal, and it is one of the ones they do not use herbicides and algicides on, because it ends up being the source for Grass Valley's drinking water. I'm fortunate that way.
And Wade, I think you talked about all the clover and peas and mushrooms and all that. That also, again, for the topic of this conversation, it helps with water retention. So
Exactly.
you
Like a
have
sponge.
Yes, a sponge.
or an infusion mat.
Yes.
Just to get an idea, like everyone out there, who cultivates cannabis? Everybody?
I couldn't hear the question.
Who cultivates cannabis?
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Who
Or
uses?
who wants to, or who wants to go from indoor to outdoor and make the shift, or go from synthetic to organic. I mean,
I'm already doing it.
I've grown indoor and I've made the shift to the greenhouse, but haven't really shifted everything to the greenhouse. So I mean,
Yeah, you're still hanging on.
Still trying to learn how to do everything.
Yeah.
And so I went from indoor to in my greenhouse with 15-gallon pots. Now I've learned I need to go 100-gallon pots or
There you go.
bigger, something bigger. So I mean, this
It's a
With
tricky
this compost,
transition going from outside or inside to outside.
different.
It's way different, but it's much more practical and enjoyable.
So on the subject of the water,
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up, because let's say you have well water. Is there something that we need to be concerned about with well water? I mean, obviously wells vary, and you get them tested for potability, but oftentimes you don't go beyond that. You're just, is it safe according to the parameters that are set by whoever determines that? What should we be looking for in our water?
A big one that a lot of folks have to deal with, because we have some what's called hard water
Right.
in this area, is water softeners. Water softeners put salts into the water, and that makes it so you can wash dishes easier, or your laundry comes cleaner. But in fact, those salts, if you're using a water softener on your well, if you put those salts on your soil, again, over time, you're killing your soil.
That's right.
You're killing your soil. Really, for me, a big part of this whole conversation is about respecting what nature provides us and trying to understand its place, how it contributes to the cannabis and its opportunity to flourish in your situation. So a real good starting point with your question would be, if you can grow good tomatoes in your spot, you can probably grow good cannabis.
I can't grow much of anything. They can grow it.
Well, that's going to change after
Well,
this.
we'll grow it for you.
We'll help. Plenty of
But
around here.
can I just want to make
Yes.
a comment, because I think the point here is that it's not just cannabis. I mean, everything that you're talking about is translatable to growing anything, and
Yes.
which is great.
Yes.
But I was wondering if also, our last workshop was on water and testing and water retention and storage, and we have videos on our website at yubriver.org, so you might want to check that out, because that is really helpful information.
Excellent.
And I know that you guys have more information on that.
What is
In your-
what.org?
Yubriver.org.
Thank-
But I was also wondering if you could go a little bit more into water and what your delivery systems are and how you do that, because I know that you also have 3 very unique and individual ways of dealing with water, and it's important.
You understand?
Sure. We use drip irrigation on 30 psi straight from the well, and we do have hard water in our well, which we find to be optimal for our growing conditions. Might not be the best drinking water. I know some people like to drink out of the well. So we're able to target, again, the root zone. So I have my computer here with a bunch of photos. If anyone wants to see them after, I'd be happy to show you. Yeah, we just use regular old emitters, drip emitters, one on the actual top of the pot. It's hard to explain if you can't see it, but top of the pot, and then in between each plant. So you're getting full, just nice, consistent emission of water, and then we're targeting the root zone. And we use a very meager 250 gallons per day for a 2,500 square foot greenhouse. And 2,500 square feet is the specialty 1C cottage grow. That's the smallest, excuse me, that's the smallest license type that California is going to be giving. So we're focusing on that to be able to build scale. So 2,500, 5,000, 10,000, 22,000, 1 acre. And tomorrow, the new provisions and regulations are coming out, and there won't be any today. Today? So amen to that. There's not going to be multi-acre grows. And then, here and there, just your good old-fashioned garden hose, 3/4-inch hose with a wand, just to get in the nooks and crannies, as the plants acclimate. But once we get the canopy up to where we want it to be, it's pretty much cruise control, from there. It's on and off. And when you have your emitter systems regulated, you know the exact time per gallon. So again, really trying to simplify everything.
And so the hard water is not a problem for you?
Not a problem.
Our water is very hard also.
For me, get it tested. There's one place here, I believe, in Grass Valley that does testing.
Kramer.
Yeah, Kramer. And they'll give you a great diagnostic on, what your goals are for your property, whatever you're growing, and they can help with that.
So you're doing all greenhouse?
All greenhouse and a small patch of full season, but everything will be greenhouse next year. Yeah, 75% greenhouse.
Why are you choosing greenhouse?
You're still using the sun, and you're able to. You're able to create a canopy, a very consistent canopy in that greenhouse. Considering we treat the greenhouse as one large pot, if you will. So again, it's not about plant count. In a 2,500 square foot greenhouse, we do about 160 plants, but depending on the setup, if it's one greenhouse has 4 rows and the other one has 2, but those 2 rows, the canopy, and I'll show you photos, it touches. So we fill out the whole footprint of the greenhouse.
So are you in the ground or in pots?
Both.
Okay.
Yep. Start in pots and go into the ground. Yeah. And the roots just do their thing.
And that ground is the one that's all, that's got plastic?
Yeah, plastic
in
like.
it?
Plastic, wall to wall, from front to end.
Sealed seams or some of this liquid?
That's a little bit of that, of like some proprietary information, but it's just the way it, like the way we build it, you know, is you don't really need, you bury it in the ground. And, you know, when you have cubic feet of dirt, you know, compacted over 125 feet by 6 inches wide, it's a lot of pressure, so it pretty much just sinks down.
And the primary reason for the
Creates its
plastic
own seal.
is not to have runoff.
Yeah,
or
zero
drainage.
discharge, and you're creating lateral root growth. And when you create lateral root growth, what is below is as above, so you get that nice robust canopy. And when you're filling out your whole canopy, you can get calculations on square footage of your canopy. So what your outputs are reverse engineered to what your square footage is, and now you can start collecting economic data on that and calculating if it's worth growing this way. If it costs you $400 is a pretty average cost per pound, but if it's costing you $700 and right now you're selling it for $800, is it economical to do this? So we're trying to bring our costs down as low as possible.
Yeah, I was just curious about how sealed that was. So apparently, there's no root rot or anything going on
No.
because you don't saturate it so much.
Exactly, so you're able to target the right amount of water for the plants and also not to have runoff. And if there's any excess runoff at this plant up here and it runs off down here, a plant down here is going to send out a scout group to pick that water up. So it's almost impossible to overwater a system like that. But it's also very possible to underwater. So finding that sweet spot is
Delicate balance.
exactly.
You imagine you can pretty much tell if they're not growing.
Well, that too, pay attention.
Again, all very different systems and different preferences, but all trying to achieve the same end goal, is low cost, being good stewards of land, and creating healthy medicine.
Save water.
And saving water. And saving water.
Because you're saving more water than the others, I think.
Yeah.
You have the measures.
And I also think with growing anything, whether it's vegetables or cannabis or fruit trees, I know we all can get stuck in our own ways. You know, it's like you have one shot to get this done. You full season, you have, you know, this April, you know, or February, your seeds are going, in April, you're ready to go, June 1st, you're in, and then it's like October, and it's like, well, I don't want to try anything different because I don't want to mess up. And so being innovative it's a risk, but it's rewarding. And we've all, again, Frida obviously did this strategically. We all have very different methods, but all, you know, producing quality. Right? Yes.
And resemblance in practices and guidelines. I mean, it's different setup, but kind of your guidelines are pretty much the same, or the practices.
Yeah, or like I like to call them philosophy.
Yeah,
You know, the
more
practical
like-
philosophy
yeah.
is based on permaculture. You know, and we're all talking up here, and I don't even think we're meaning to talk permaculture, but we are.
Right, I think we'll work with that as one of the models for what we're trying to accomplish. I'll talk about how I water. I hand water. We have access to Nevada Irrigation District's canal water, and we're at 3,100 feet, and we have this heavy red clay. So for years, during the drought, I was used to our soil drying out, and I've been building up layers of mulch and ground cover and mulch and compost and whatnot. This past winter, I don't know if you remember, at our farm, we had over 100 inches of rain. And we hadn't had, we bought our property in 2011. Between 2011 and 2016, we hadn't had 100 inches of rain in all of those years together. Yeah. And last winter, we had 100 inches in one winter. So our heavy red clay soil was so waterlogged this spring that in the month of June, we didn't water. We just made holes in the spring, put the plants in. That's where we used the fish emulsion to kind of get them triggered to start growing. And actually, the first batch of plants that I put out, we drowned them. The soil was so waterlogged that they never flourished. So we ended up pulling them and substituting them with plants that got a later start in the year. I'm still learning how to be a farmer. So like I said, in all of June, we didn't water, basically. And then as we moved into August, and you remember there were some pretty hot days this summer, it was still the case that we would go typically 3 days, sometimes as many as 5 or 6 days between waterings. And each of those waterings, a plant might get, if I had to measure it, it would probably be between 5 and 10 gallons of water. And here's the thing about plants, especially if you're outdoors in a situation where the plant's roots can find each other through your layers of mulch and compost, they will do that. They like that. They're a grass. Cannabis is a grass. It likes to mix its roots. You don't want to pack them together, but if you give them an opportunity, they'll find each other. They'll communicate with each other. There's a whole thing that goes on there. But what I usually do is, as a plant grows, you water the drip line, the area on the perimeter of the plant where when it rains, rain drips down the plants and falls to the ground. That's the spot where the roots are still growing out. You want to encourage the roots to go out, so you water the drip line. You're not flooding the entire area. You don't have to. You want to, the plant's roots need oxygen. And part of what you're doing by watering the drip line is you're temporarily flooding that space where the roots are, and then the water settles down through your layers of soil and draws oxygen down into the roots. And if you've built up layers of material, lots of organic content in the soil, each of those little pieces of organic content act like a little sponge to hold the water. And so the roots can find those things. When we harvest at the end of the year on our farm, after we've taken the plants down, at some point we take down the structure that was supporting them and then pull the roots out. And it's always fun to see the plants that are really happy. They make this mat, very much like what Brian's talking about. He's got a 2,500 square foot version of this little mat.
Yeah.
But the roots actually make a net. They find a sweet spot in those layers of material we built up, and then they run sideways. They find each other. And so when we pull the roots, they come up out of the little hole that we make when we first put the plants in the ground. And then, depending on which way we're pulling, a whole layer of material kind of rolls up off the ground along with this net of fine roots, big roots and fine roots all making a net. And then you shake it out and you get this beautiful little sculpture about, as he was saying, as above, so below. As below, so above. If your plant's roots are really happy and thriving and flourishing, and that's why the rhizosome is so important. Because the rhizosome is full of little creatures that take sugars from your plants. Your plants do photosynthesis, they make sugars. At night, they take those sugars down into the roots and offer them to the creatures that live in your soil. And they take those sugars and give back the byproducts of their metabolism that the plant then uses to keep building itself. And the thing is, if you're growing cannabis to a recipe, trying to provide specific nutrients on a specific day and time or a specific point in their life cycle, you're counting on a couple of different things being the same every time you do it. The plants that you're working with have the same needs as the original recipe that you put together those plants had, plus the weather conditions. Like this year, if I was watering to a specific schedule based on my previous experience of the drought, I would have had a nightmarish year this year because I would have been overwatering because the soil, the environment had changed. So part of what you have to do with permaculture is you pay attention to the specifics of your situation day by day over the course of time. You come to understand what nature is providing for you and then how to use it. So part of what I'm saying is by building up the organic content in your soil and watering selectively to the needs of your plant as versus any sort of set watering schedule, you can significantly reduce the amount of water that you need and the amount of time that you need to spend in the garden waving a hose around if you're a hand waterer. Yes, Beth?
Wade, have you found any difference in the water to the strain of the plant, or?
Yes, different strains of cannabis definitely have different needs at different points in their life cycle. Just to go granular for a second, we'll talk about Harley Sue. Is a high CBD, low THC variety created by Lawrence Ringo a number of years ago. It does really well in our environment. It likes the hot, dry summers that we have, particularly at elevation. Early on in the summer, it doesn't need a lot of, it's not a heavy feeder. It doesn't need a lot of water. When it sets flower, all of a sudden it wants a lot more water. And it's 8 to 10 weeks of flowering type plant. Towards the end of that time, doesn't need water at all. You want the flowers to finish off. Afgoo, something that I worked with a number of years ago, but haven't in a few years, if I remember right, is a heavy feeder, but I didn't have to feed it. Its roots ran really well in my compost layers that I've built up, and it wanted water on a regular basis. Now, it might be that other folks have different experience, but I'm pretty convinced that every different kind of cannabis, depending on what part of the world it's from, has different needs. Cultivars that the genetics are from areas of like Southeast Asia, of Southern Asia, like Afghanistan, where they get 10 inches of rain a year, probably are not going to be able to do well in Mendocino, where there's a lot of humidity in the air and rain comes in October every year and lots of it. Whereas cultivars from Thailand or South Africa, Congo area, for example, where it rains a lot year-round, those cultivars will be really good at dealing with mold and mildew issues. Just right there is one difference in the different types of cannabis that are out there. And I suggest that their feeding needs and all of that, they're all different. They're all unique, each of these cultivars. And so by doing the practices that we're describing of trying to create a little pocket of beautiful nature for your plants, you give them the opportunity to find what they need when they need it, instead of you force feeding them when you think they need it. They know more what they're doing than I do. I'm totally convinced of that. So it's really about creating an opportunity for them.
Yeah, my question was kind of just letting Krsna get into talking about the hugel culture mounds and how that retains water, but then also maybe having you all sort of talk a little more prescriptively about how you're generating that medium and how you're making the compost. You know, what specifically is going into that?
Yeah, I'd love to tell a little story of how we've evolved over the years, and it's been about 8 years. We started out buying the best kind of soil that we could buy, organic potting soil, Vital Landscaping. They have like a methodology for compost teas. They, all organic products. And, so we buy buy the soil, buy a bunch of amendments. So we buy worm castings and guano and whatever other good amendments that were being sold. And then we plant our plants in it, top dress throughout the year, do compost tea. You do compost tea, you gotta buy the mycorrhizae, a set of 6 different ingredients that you're buying and doing constantly. And that system works really well. But what I found is that, then we've evolved over the years, and then it's like, okay, mulching. It's important to mulch because we don't want to lose the moisture just straight into the air. So we water, the soil gets wet, and there's no cover on the soil, so the water, half of it just goes up back into the air. And so by mulching, you're keeping the sunlight off the soil, you're allowing an insulative layer to allow the moisture that you put in to stay there. So we started mulching and mulching, top dressing, and basically building layers on top of our beds. In our greenhouse, we dug like a 4-foot deep trench we have like 3 rows, and we lined that with like gopher wire hardware mesh, and we put. But at one point, I dug everything out and started over effectively. And so we put the hardware mesh in, and we put drainage pipes, so perforated drainage pipes. So it's like 6 inches with slits everywhere. So it allows an exchange of water and gas. And we have that pipe down in the bottom of the trenches to soak up any excess water and to provide an airspace so that the environment at the bottom of the trench stays aerobic instead of anaerobic. Aerobic bacteria is good, anaerobic not so good. Anaerobic conditions is when your roots will start to rot. And that system worked very well, but some of the downsides of it are that when you're buying potting soil, you basically have granules that are different sizes, so small, medium, large granules, mostly circular, and that's not quite how things are in nature. In nature, you think, okay, in the forest, in the rainforest, what's happening? All this material is constantly just falling down to the forest floor. And what is that material? It's leaves with nitrogen. It's also carbon. It's branches and sticks that are mostly carbon. Those are falling down, and those are just building layers. And you end up with a layer every season from the forest that is fibrous and porous, and it's the ideal structure for the fungus to grow in, for the bacteria to grow in, and for it to all break down and turn into soil. With just granules and no fibers, it's not providing a very good space for the fungus to grow. And what I found is that, like, we'd either get like no fungus or like a complete outgrowth of fungal, just too much. And we want a symbiotic, like, you guys drink kombucha maybe, and kombucha is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So in our composting, we're trying to create that symbiotic culture as well. And there's different symbiotic cultures. Some kombucha is more anaerobic, whereas in your soil you want it more aerobic. But you can still have a symbiotic relationship between the bacteria and the fungus. That worked, but it was very expensive, and there's a lot of materials to buy all the time. And we've known about permaculture a little bit, and by no means any experts. Hugelculture, and so when we dug out our trenches again and started over, we put wood in the bottom. That will be a long-term carbon storage. Basically, that carbon will eventually break down and become a available to plants. And then we effectively, instead of filling our trenches with soil, we fill it with the raw materials to compost. So we start with, well, and let me back up 1 second here, is that for the longest time I've been growing cannabis, and that's like, okay, I'm trying to grow cannabis. My goal is to have a healthy, a large, healthy plant that produces, that's organic, that will make great medicine, that produces high numbers of terpenes, and because we all know that there's the terpenes are often responsible for the health benefits, the synergistic relationship or effect of the THC with the terpenes. So how can we get the most terpenes as well? And but over time, it's like, okay, I'm not a cannabis farmer anymore. Now I'm just farming the microbiome, the fungus, the bacteria. That's really all my focus is, and if I do that well, the plants, whatever plant you put in there is going to do well. And a big part of it is the plant. So since we're just trying to grow the soil, the plant, its primary purpose is to make sugars. Its primary purpose is to reproduce. Second from reproducing is to feed sugars to the fungus and into the soil. And so if you have the right environment that the plant can actually do a good job of producing sugars and feeding your soil, and you don't need to be adding a bunch of other sugars and kelp is an additive that you can use, and that's primarily sugar. So yeah, growing, composting. What are the primary 4 things that you need in composting? Anyone know?
Water, carbon, nitrogen.
Very good. Air. So to have good composting, you need a good balance, the proper ratios of those. There's different types of composting. There's aerobic, anaerobic, vermicomposting. We focus on aerobic composting. Anaerobic composting would be like fermentation, bokashi, there's a whole big movement to do anaerobic composting. And it's really like more digestion than it is composting per se, but that's a method to make nutrients available and break something down very quickly. And then vermicomposting is just basically the stuff's there's maybe not enough material or matter to build up heat. So the worms come and they will eat the material and turn it into castings for you. And worm castings is the best possible plant food you could ever have by far. That's if you can get a lot of worm castings, your plants are going to be happy. And best if they're fresh worm castings that the worms are actually living in the soil and making it. There's an ideal ratio of carbon to nitrogen in your compost. And also with soil, when I was researching soil, I was told that, read that the ideal soil structure is 50% organic matter, 25% water, and 25% air. So if that's like your ratio, if your soil can support that, now if you buy potting soil, it might be too light, so that you might end up with like 50% air.
But aren't these when you're buying everybody's buying this stuff, a lot of it's not even soil, it's just a medium. Exactly.
It's been baked in the oven and it's dead, it's not living. Then that's why you got to buy the mycorrhizae and add that, and then your fungus starts growing, but then you don't have much bacteria there because you don't have manure or we want to build the goal is to build a compost pile that will break down quickly and provide the nutrients to the plant. And turn it into rich soil throughout the growing season. Now you could do it, typically most people might not do that because it's like, it's going to take like 4 months or 6 months for this stuff to all break down and become available for the plant. But actually it can happen much more quickly, and you can grow in the compost while it's still decomposing. and there's some benefits to that as well. First what we would do is gather all the raw materials that we can get. The primary things being straw and hay. Hay is your alfalfa hay or whatever kinds of hay you can get. Straw is going to be your carbon primarily. So straw is like a maybe 50 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. And hay, like alfalfa, is going to be all your green material. That's your nitrogen. It's going to be like a 12 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. And ideally in a compost pile, you want maybe 10 to 20, roughly a ratio of carbon to nitrogen is the ideal in that range. So if you get straw and hay and you layer them, you're going to pretty much be close to a 15 or 20 to 1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And so what we'll start with, we'll dig a hole, and ideally we're digging a hole because we want to be below ground, and we want less evaporation. So if all this material is down in the ground, then there's not going to be, the water's going to stay where we want it to mostly. And also it's going to be a cooler temperature. Say when it's really hot outside, this stuff's going to stay cool. So gather the materials, we dig a hole if we can, and then we build a container in there for protection from gophers, and that's usually done with hardware mesh. And that could be a big enough project in and of itself, just building those. But it works similarly to a smart pot or something, but it lasts a lot longer. Smart pots I've seen, last a couple of years, and then they're shredded apart, and they're just littering they're made out of plastic, effectively. So it's you're getting all these plastic shards all over your place. And so then size. The next important thing with composting is size. Ideally, if you want to do thermal composting, you're going to need about a cubic meter of volume. So 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet full of materials. Will be enough material there that you have thermal mass. You can reach like a critical thermal mass where the temperature will build up, and you go through these different phases. So you go through medium temperature range, and then you go to a high temperature range, and then back down to the medium temperature. And different bacteria and fungus grow at those different temperature ranges. So you'll start out with the lower temperatures, then you have a group of extremophiles that will, as the temperature gets hotter, those will grow and thrive. And those will do a different set of work. They'll help to break things down more quickly, and then once it starts cooling back down, then you can effectively start using your compost pile. Aeration is really important. So we have the perforated drainage pipes on the bottom of the space, or as like a U shape that goes from one side down to the bottom and back up. We'll put a couple of those in there. So there's a lot of air space in. Also, we will put lava rock maybe down on the bottom just to provide an extra layer of drainage, so you don't get an anaerobic condition at the bottom. Then once we've built the whole thing and it's composting, and we'll poke holes in it to aerate it more. So using rebar or even like a big tamping bar to make big holes. The other best way to get aeration is the earthworms. When they're crawling around and they're eating, they're making tubes and tunnels everywhere. And so that's going to allow your water to drain into different places. When the water's gone, you're going to get a lot of airspace. How is that compost pile built? It's built with, so starting with straw, and then hay of any sort, and then manure. So like we source sheep manure, horse manure, alpaca manure, any of the local farms that are willing to provide it, and or generally better it's from a neighbor or someplace that you've established a relationship and you know how they're treating the animals and their farm, they have a good space, and they're maybe not using antibiotics for their animals, because if they're feeding antibiotics, then that can get in poo, and then you have antibiotics in your compost, and that's going to prevent your bacteria from growing. So we try to get all these various sources of manure. Those will go down as a layer. Then we'll do more straw, more hay, and we'll mix some of the local red dirt in. And the local red dirt is great. A lot of grocery stores now are selling like silica, buy a bucket of silica amendment, and it's basically clay. And it's good because it absorbs water and it has some micronutrients in there. But your local red dirt here is clay and has lots of good micronutrients. There's a lot of those trace minerals that are really critical to plants, and that you might not normally be getting. A lot of people will buy the azomite or different rock dust to get some of those trace minerals, but your local soil has most of that. It'll have iron, copper, silver, gold, etc. So that'll go down as a layer in there. And those layers generally are more moist. They'll hold the moisture and they'll stay wet. And then, another layer of straw and hay, and a layer of potting, so like our old recycled dirt, the soil that's already been used, and so that'll go down as a layer in there. And that's effectively, it will just keep doing that until the container is full. And then we'll even fill it up even more until it's like, if it's a 4 foot hardware mesh and you can't dig into the ground, your mound will maybe be 6 or 7 feet tall when you start. And you can't put anything more on it because it just rolls off. And then at that point, it'll all compost and it'll start sinking and it'll get back down to the level of the top. And so then you gotta wait. You could wait up to your choice, kind of how long, minimum of a couple weeks. But you could wait up to a few months if you want to really let it break down. Ideally, you're prepared. You're doing this in like January or something, and come February, March, it's all well composted. But we've done it where we've built these piles in June as well, and planted right in them as well. While you're waiting, you can get a compost thermometer and keep an eye on the temperature. And you'll see it. It'll start from 60 degrees very quickly. It'll be up to 80 or 90, and eventually get up to 120, 140, 160. Stay there for a few days and start breaking down. And typically in big composting operations, they'll use the payloaders to mix up the compost to re-aerate it so that it breaks down more quickly. And we don't have that capability, and we're not at that large of a scale, so it's really, we can, by poking holes in it, we're effectively doing the job of mixing it to help it break down faster. We've planted in compost piles that are 140 degrees, and we just make a nest at the top. So we'll dig out a hole, and we'll put some of our old soil in there, and then plant our baby plant in that. And that gives it the time to reach through that nest that we make. And by the time that all the roots get through that nest, the compost pile is cooled down enough to where the plant can be happy. And typically, growing in hot compost, you would think, the roots aren't going to do well or survive if it's like 100 degrees. But we found that actually it's not the case, that the roots will go through the nest and they'll be growing into 100-degree compost, and they're really happy. And there's a benefit to that, is that all your chemical reactions then start happening more quickly. So instead of having 55-degree soil, you have 90 to 100 degrees, and so everything just happens fast, and you'll see explosive vegetative growth.
You're talking a lot about compost, and also you guys about regenerative practices. And I wonder if you're using biochar with those, because nutrient leach and erosion and water pollution, it's all kind of about holding.
Yes, that's a great question. Biochar is it's a method of farming that they've done in the Amazon for millennia, and they basically take the green material, make a big hot fire, spread out the coals, and then put plant matter on it, and then cover it and let it smolder, and it turns to carbon, turns to biochar, and then they mix that in with their soils, and they say that's how the Amazon, well, in South America as well, but yeah, they basically, we're able to do regenerative farming for years and years and years, decades, thousands of years, and still have healthy soil because they were using biochar, right? And biochar is good because it takes carbon out of the air as well. So for global warming and everything, that's a benefit. We have used biochar in the past, like as an amendment. When we're doing the composting, we don't necessarily add that in, but it is in there because of the layers of the old soil that we mix in as well. So.
And it's one of those inputs you can make yourself.
Yeah. Great question. Have you talked about local sourcing? And what I'm hearing is a lot of carbon generation by going and getting hay, going and getting straw. I'm hearing a lot of petrochemicals being consumed doing that. Have any of you folks tried to local source the natural resource that occurs on your farms, aka the black oak leaves, the pine needles, the grass, and try to local source from that to reduce your carbon footprint? But I'm hearing a lot of movement of mechanical vehicles.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't used oak leaves or pine needles yet. I know the pine needles can be said they're slightly acidic. But that's for a short period, so if you wait for them to turn brown, then they're not going to be acidic, and you can use them. We're not like opposed when they're there. We don't get rid of them, but yeah, you could do a lot by gathering all of the materials from those types of materials on your land and on your farm.
There has been times you use the oak leaves.
We have used them a bit, but not in terms of enough of them to do at the scale that we're doing. But if you're going to do 6 plants at home, and you don't need them to be too big, and you want to just build a nice little compost pile for it, then yeah, you can likely do that. The other thing is if you are getting the manures, locally, like for me, it's like a 15-20 minute drive to get. Or less, 15 minutes to go, get some manure.
Right, I realize that some things have to come from afar. I do appreciate that, but I mean, the amount of forest residual accumulation that occurs that can be shredded and then composted, worked into the soils as organic material, and you increase your water retention, reduce your natural fuel loading, allow water penetration to occur onto that site, reduce your water consumption. That reduction of water consumption will flow into that watershed. So I wondered, did anyone try to do any legitimate?
We have one huge field that we started getting. They were dumping the oak, chips, and everyone said, "Oh, you can't use chips; they're too acidic. It's going to wreck the soil." Blah blah blah. But we built up a whole field just with wood chips. And, well, we have sheep, and we used to have chicken, but we only have sheep now.
Right.
So it used to be really hard to walk on that field,
right.
And now it's
spongy.
It's spongy, and all kinds of stuff.
Tannic gas will wash out quickly when rain falls.
The pines put off a substance that stops the root division unless it sets for about 4 to 6 months, unless you have an arborvitae, evergreen plant. Then they'll grow in it, or strawberry will grow in the needles. Right. Other than that, there's a substance that stops it from doing the root division.
Have you shredded those needles?
Have I shredded those needles?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm an arborist.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. So did you shred the needles, or they?
Yeah, I have I've planted redwood, pines, all sorts of strawberries, things like that. Tomatoes.
Right.
And which tomatoes is a basic vine, they'll do that, but otherwise they have to set. There's a bacteria that eats that.
Right.
okay, and that comes in. And then once you get that in there and established in your bed, you can do that. Otherwise, it'll slow down the root
The
division.
root division, but you're saying the 4 to 6 months sitting, preferably shred, that.
It doesn't matter if it's shred or not.
Okay,
It won't.
but that breakdown of 4 to 6 months is what you're saying, that.
Right, the first 3 months, that's why oaks don't compete with the pines.
Right,
It's because of that
right.
element in the ground there. So where you're doing that, you want to do it different than just in the pot.
I just, going back to local sourcing is what I, off that land.
Can I add a small thing? I'm shredding like forest mulch and use it as compost and carbon material, so you can, as he's using wood or wood chip, so you can apply that and get this period time shorter while you're composting it. And another thing, you can kind of, gather the leaves after winter. They've been falling down in fall, kind of get the moisture toward a part of it, like compost tea with the rain, like what's happening now outside. And then it's more soft, more easy to, compost and get apart. So yeah, that's kind of.
Yes.
Only want to ask, the black soldier fly?
Sorry?
Black soldier fly? It's like a worm that eats everything, the bones, the oils, and the pine leaves. There we have there in the other side of the road, we have a lot of pines over there, and we have a lot of grasses. They are exotic, grasses that we don't want. We got everything to have control of the fires.
Yeah.
We make these programs that we try to find and make huge compost. And it's the problem that we have, we go to the restaurants or someone try to bring us our green trash, but we use the black soldier fly. So this fly is native of here, California.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hungry, You can eat his weight in one day.
Do you buy the larva of those or the?
I think so from here. There's a lot. I was looking for myself, but here I was in a farm, and they throw all the leaves here. So people throw the leaves and the sticks, and they don't recycle all that thing, because they have a lot of sprays and chemicals, and they cannot use everything. Well, I use like a bucket, different buckets, and put these worms. It's a worm, So in like 4 weeks, all the leaves was gone, and the essence of the worm give you like some of the nutrients you need for the crop. So maybe, I don't know, later I can show you the fly. I'm sure you can have seen because it's nature here.
Yes.
And the worm, permaculture is like now it's all people are using. And there's another question now. You don't know someone that have been make like a aquaponic system with weed? With cannabis?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Aquaponic with cannabis. That I make aquaponic there and I grow my food, I don't know if they have someone here that.
I've heard of people in the region using aquaponics.
Here you can grow salmon and grow wheat in the same system.
Gotcha.
I've seen it here. A friend of mine has done that.
Ah, yeah?
Yeah.
And he's have good results.
With, what's the, not tilapia, but
Crab.
remember the fish, Josh's?
Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Koi.
The koi fish.
Koi fish.
Oh, nice.
Took his friend's koi fish and made an aquaponics farm for his food and campus. Under a greenhouse.
Yeah, good products.
I will say this, under California's new rules with the State Water Board, doing aquaponics and cannabis will be a very challenging thing to get through the approval process, because the Water Board wants to control cannabis potential threats to water. And part of how they define those threats are proximity to aquatic life-bearing waters. And I don't know, again, the regulations that just came out, that they're not making it easy to grow cannabis and comply with the law. And water is a big issue around this. I want to throw in this idea. Katie's describing a really beautiful large-scale compost operation. If you, at home, you generate kitchen waste. You can feed that material, and there's certain things that are better than others, to a worm box to make worm castings. There's an input you can generate at home. The oak leaves and pine needle question is an excellent one. Those are some inputs that can help not only build carbon in your soil, but add to the organic content of your soil, but it does take time. Exactly. Pine needles, cannabis likes acidic soil. The soil here, the red clay, is pretty close to the right pH already, but I use pine needles in my garden, but they spend a year in a big pile before they come into the garden. And we mix in oak leaves. We use oak leaves in our worm box. They like it. They like them. But I'm really a big fan of letting things pile up right where they are, where nature drops them, and letting them pile up. I'm going to do a little plug here for a second. I have a website called House of Harlequin. And if you go on there, there's a blog post I did called Soil Libations. And it's about how to find spots on your property where life is flourishing in the soil or in the air, and capture samples of those and literally cultivate them and grow them out so that you can use them in your garden. And the beauty of that idea is you're capturing the biology that works on your land, not buying it microcorzae in the bags at the store, which they're often good products. Again, I'm not against products per se, but you can generate those things right on your own property. You can, any place where mushrooms are growing is a good place to find the spores of mushrooms that flourish on your ground. And that's the thing, work with nature and what it provides for you, learn what you can benefit from or provide for your plants.
So would you just throw, pick some of those mushrooms and throw them into your compost?
So that's where the spores.
That's one approach. I was thinking one way to capture biology in your soil is to find a spot, for example, where mushrooms are growing or where the vegetation that grows wild on your property is really lush and flourishing. And if you go right to the soil at the base of that growth, you'll find that there's a bunch of layers, like Katie was describing, of what nature has dropped there over the years. And if you clear that back down to soil, take a I make a little wooden box and put some cooked white rice in it. Cover it with a cotton cloth that's open, not, a coarse weaved cloth. Cover that box on the open side, and then flip it upside down right on that soil. Put a rock on top of it so critters don't get to it, and then come back in a week or 10 days, and when you turn it back over, your cloth will be covered with different colored patches of life. And when you lift it inside the rice, it'll be the same story. And if you take that material and rinse it out into a bucket of non-chlorinated water, separate out the solids, the rice, what's left of the rice and whatnot, the solids, and add that to your compost pile. It really loves it in the compost pile, that stuff that you just did. But meantime, the water that you have is full of biology, and you don't want to keep it long. Feed it a little bit of sugar just to keep it happy, and then you can offer it in a dilute solution to the plants in your garden. And each of those places where you offer that diluted solution that you've made, you are in effect inoculating that spot of soil with the biology that's growing in this one spot you identified where things are really happy, things are flourishing, lush. And see, that's a way of, and the reason that those plants are happy and lush in that particular spot is the biology that's going on in the soil right there. And meantime, because that's the soil you've got on your property, the biology that's there is the appropriate stuff for your property.
Krsna, I was wondering, thank you for that robust description of how you build soil and composting. That's incredible. But can you also talk about how you deliver water?
Yes, definitely. Well, let me back up too on building the soil. you know, and the compost is like, we're talking a lot of, you know, words, and it all sounds very maybe complex, but really it's actually pretty easy to do. And it's kind of, I found I haven't really screwed it up yet. Somehow, I mean, I've done it a bunch of different ways, and you know, it's really, you just, if you can get the materials together and get them in a large enough pile, you know, they're gonna, it will all work together, it'll break down, and you're gonna be, I mean, like when I was growing up, and you know, in our family we had our vegetable garden, big potato patch, and tomatoes, and this and that, and we had a compost pile on the back of the back side of the veggie garden. The biggest and healthiest plants we had were the ones that grew out of the compost pile, you know, these blackberry and raspberry bushes that are just like huge, the most delicious, tasty things. So being able to grow in compost, and active compost is, it's really a perfect way to do it, you know. And for our water, we, let's see, we're on a well, and it is hard water. It has lots of calcium and magnesium, which are good things that cannabis loves. So, you know, in that regard, you're good. The water's maybe slightly acidic, which is maybe not as ideal, but it's probably okay. We have a storage tank, like a 2,600 gallon storage tank for emergency, you know, if the well goes out or if whatever happens, you know, we can still water for a while. And that runs into our garden. We have, you know, regular spray emitters. So the goal for us is to completely cover the whole surface area of the soil with water. I found that with drip, when we had like just drip emitters and the way they spread out, and it didn't seem to always work as well as to just spraying the top down. And you know, that also has benefits, say during the middle of the day. In the summer it's very hot out, and if you can do like a quick spray of the soil, you know, you're going to get like an evaporative cooling effect as well. So
Are those
so
spray
yeah,
emitters underneath the mulch or on top of the mulch?
above the mulch, yeah. Yeah, it might, you know, in an ideal situation, you maybe would have, you could have drip emitters under your mulch, and then also sprayers on top or something, and you could control them and use them different ways. But you know, one of the really nice things that we have is a smart irrigation controller. And basically what that is it's a current technology. They've just come out in the last 4 or 5 years, but they basically, they have evapotranspiration algorithms that calculate temperature, humidity, and the types of plants that you have, and they will get an idea of how much your plants are sweating, how much moisture are they using at any one point, and the algorithms will look at the current temperature, current humidity, and they can adjust the watering amount every day based on whatever your weather is. So you have a baseline that works for you, you get that set and established, but then if you get like some cold days or some very humid days, your plants aren't going to use as much water, and so the controller will automatically every day adjust the amount of water it gives based on those conditions. So that's like a huge benefit for saving water. And also the smart controllers also allow you to do a little more flexibility with your watering schedules, so you can have a lot of different types of programs. For instance, we'll have like a regular watering schedule, say 5 days a week. You know, the 2 days that won't get watered, you know, split between the week, so like a Sunday and a you know, Wednesday or Thursday. And you'll have your regular watering schedule that just gets the basic needs. And then say once a week you have another schedule that does like a deep watering, that just like gets a good heavy wash and rinse, you know. And also they have cycle and soak options too, where for a certain program you could say, okay, I really, if this is going to be running for this long, I want this zone to get 30 minutes of water, but I don't want it all to come at once. You can say cycle and soak, and however many cycles, how much time it waits in between. So then when it goes to water, it'll water a bit, and it'll jump or wait, and then it'll come back and water a bit more. And you get kind of like that drip effect by having a cycle and soak on those. There's the machine we use is called Rain Machine, but there's a few different ones out there, and they cost, on the low end like $150 maybe, and then there's higher end models with more zones that are like $250. So, for the watering, we already mentioned it, mulching on top, as thick of a layer as straw on top as you can. It's going to keep the moisture in the ground and prevent it from evaporating. We also try to pay attention to runoff. So, we have these drain pipes in the greenhouse, and if there's too much water, we should see some runoff out of the drain pipe, and we don't. So that we can pay attention to that and make sure that that's not happening. Another thing that we're working towards is rain catchment. So we've got a couple more storage tanks, and we're looking to hook up our gutters to the storage tanks so that off season and whenever it rains, we're catching all that water. Any questions about water or?
Is it legal to catch rainwater?
That's a great question. I've heard in some places it's not legal. But usually that's in certain urban areas, certain municipalities and things like that. But I don't think there's any states that have a law that says no, you can't catch.
Eugene, Oregon.
Colorado.
Eugene, Oregon, there was a law, I thought.
Yeah, I believe you're allowed to catch rainwater in California. You're not allowed to divert streams that are actually already on the ground.
I have a small question about your, let's say, biology monitoring, if you do so. At least the best tool that I know is a microscope, and it's pretty expensive, and you need to learn about it. And I wondered if you know about more easy, available tools to maintain your hard work with composting. Maybe some people using teas, and I also know cannabis is more to the bacteria ratio and not fungi dominant as woods or forests, so that's important.
Which is a benefit of composting, because you're going to have much higher bacterial counts than
I look for smell with compost. It should smell good. I take that as a sign of life. I don't get a microscope either.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I think, a lot of times when things are working well and you can see that and you've experienced it's obvious that and certainly in a compost tea it makes much more sense to, but with the soil it's like, what would I do? Dig up some soil and look at it in the microscope, and I would see that there's stuff alive, more ideally for me would be really good sensors and monitoring throughout the greenhouse and the soil for temperature, for moisture, hooked up to, pulse and controlling system that can really monitor and give you alerts, and, but all the sensors and stuff are really expensive.
Yeah, your best microscope is a farmer, shadow of a farmer, Just being there daily, being in communication with the people you're working with. But that's a great question to bring up, because where this industry is heading, it's going to be very focused on data and inputs and cost effectiveness, and we're a fairly small scale. And like what Christian said is when you see it working, why try to fix it?
Many times it's the process still that will work, because people dealing with different soils, different sites, need to build more, need to build less, need to go work with bacteria ratio. So in those times you need a consistent observation that it's not your eyes or your senses, or because that's biome. kind of our feelings.
There we use peroxide, you know, spice, hydroxide peroxide. That make more, that you prefer, you have a herd or something.
Hydrogen
Peroxide, yeah.
Yeah. We use that over there. We take the soil and put the peroxide, so kill the bacteria and the organic. And you have two weights, you know, one without and within. And then you compare the weight. So then you have like a more or less how much organic material.
After treatment with hydrogen peroxide, the soil weighs less. Interesting.
I had a question, maybe if any of you could speak on it. I've been just started to hear about dry farming, and that kind of boggles my mind because we use water every day. And how does the dry farming work?
Don't know anything about it.
I've heard the same question. I was actually, there's a group up in Humboldt
Yeah.
doing that, which,
Yeah, the Emerald Cup has been shown them a couple times.
in like Israel, you know, in Israel, it's one of the most arid places on earth.
Yeah.
And there's cannabis grown there. I'm not that familiar with it, and maybe I shall research it.
My guess is it's going to have a lot to do with building organic content in the soil, so that the moisture that nature provides to the soil is enough for your plants to flourish. I know in the wine world, in Europe, the grapes that are considered the best for wine are not watered. They don't irrigate their grapes. If you're irrigating grapes, they're lesser quality. Yeah, less sugar. Is that a direct correlation to cannabis? I have no idea. Just like with smelling compost to see if it's working okay, I spend some time in the garden every day with my plants, and part of what I do is go to some of them and just get down on my hands and knees and literally just rake the soil back near the drip line again and see how wet is it. Pick up a handful of it. You know, if it clumps, they clearly don't need water. If it's starting to turn to dust, it might be a little late actually. But typically you find it between those 2 points, and it really becomes, to me, I think we as cultivators need to pay respect to this plant for all the incredible things that it does for us. All the incredible things it does for us. And part of that respect is being involved enough with your plants to recognize when they need more water, or to recognize the onset of an infestation of mites, or that this particular spot is getting too much water in your automated watering system. You know, there's nothing like the shadow of the farmer to benefit the plants. And I think this plant particularly has evolved to benefit us, and we have evolved to benefit from it. And part of that is a symbiotic relationship that is, you could call it spiritual, or you could call it psychic, or you could, there's all kinds of terms for it, but I think there's a little bit, there's a lot of room for an enhancement of quality in what you're doing by the attention paid to the plants as over their life cycle. It's really dramatic in indoor where you're providing all their inputs, but if you're outdoors, nature does most of the hard work, and each of us is trying to describe our way of giving the plants what they need without harming the environment, and ideally actually enhancing it.
And we've all tortured some plants here and there, not watered them, and I think cannabis can actually do really well with very little amounts of water. You're not going to be growing big trees, but you can grow nice plants that do well with small amounts of water.
Yes.
I have a few questions. Number one, is it good to use pine needles for mulch? Would you recommend that or no?
I use pine needles for mulch after they've sat for a long time. We get a lot of wood chips. We also rake up piles of things sometimes. Like last winter, we had a lot of leaves that would work their way into big piles, and this was a great opportunity to just gather up those leaves and make piles of them and let them sit.
I have a second part of this question. Is I've had a problem with thrips the last couple of years.
With thrips?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And what do you recommend for that, like some diatomaceous earth? Because they're going after like woody material and organic material, and then they end up shooting away the plant. And it's devastated me a couple of times coming home. I mean, they look fine in the morning, come home, and they're just dead.
Wow.
You know what I'm talking about? They look like termites.
Thrips.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's. Yeah, there's.
I was thinking diatomaceous earth, or maybe SM90 spraying the soil down, but.
Diatomaceous earth is good, but as soon as it gets wet, it's not effective anymore, really. So, because it's really small, and so the water will coat the surface of the sharp diatoms, and so basically then that's not effective. You know? So once it dries back out, then maybe it can work again. But
it also leads me to another point of infestations in the soil. Is I've heard of certain type of fungus gnats or whatever hanging out in the soil if you don't cultivate it, and other types of weirdness. So I guess there's sprays and stuff.
I stay away from whatever kind of sprays you can. I mean, it's like you want everything to be as alive as possible, right? So I would say if you're having those kind of problems, I don't know that we've had problems like that specifically, but if the soil structure, it probably comes down to the soil structure is not ideal, and or the amount of water, or if it's too waterlogged, that you'll get the springtails. I've seen infestations of those and things like that. So having the right balance, where, and especially fiber, there's probably not enough fiber in your soil. Like we all need fiber in our guts. The soil needs fiber as well, because that's really where the fungus and the bacteria are going to thrive. So lots of fiber, lots of air space, and as much organic matter as possible. And then a lot of poke holes there for aeration in it. Keep it aerated as deep down as you can, and then don't overwater it.
And is it even good to keep compost pile in the garden? I heard it's not.
Our garden, every plant is growing in a compost pile. So. Yeah, I mean, we've over the years, I had a compost bin, and composting bin. We put all our food scraps in it. The worms were doing their work, and you have this bin, and after a year, you're like, okay, I should harvest this out, and you go, and it's like, you put a lot of stuff in there, and now there's not much left, and you've been going at it, and then it's like, okay, put it out on a tarp, spread it out, let all the worms come, harvest your worms back, and then you have this stuff left, and then you gotta sift it, and you end up with a small handful of worm castings or whatever, a small bucket of worm castings. And so, it's not really going to work at the scale of, trying to grow a lot of plants and grow big. And not even a lot, but, so yeah, I mean, the best I think is doing the composting and letting all the worms come. They're already in the soil and around. They'll find the food. They're like, oh, there's food there, let's go. And then they're going to be eating it. They're going to be making worm castings. And what I've found is by this time of year, if you go and scrape our soil, it's all broken down by now already. So it's nice, rich soil. But the top 4 inches, maybe 6 inches, it's all worm castings. They come up to the top to poo. They don't like to poo where they're hanging out, so they go up to the top or out. And
I'm at 4,000 feet, and I don't think there's any worms up there, at all.
For sure you'll have. If you go and get some manure as well from different.
It's the winters up there.
I mean, I'm at 3,600 feet,
right?
So there's plenty of worms.
Right.
Yeah, worms.
And
Even
I need some.
And maybe try to
barn clean.